Maggie Haley. Maggie Haley is going to talk about WomenWorks.
WomenWorks was a project, so we're moving from health issues, which were a dominant focus, certainly for the Women's Centre. And when I moved to the Kootenay to Nelson in the mid-80s, and part of the reason I moved here was because of the strength of the women's movement, having come from Eastern Canada, been part of one of the first transition houses in Nova Scotia, having worked in a women's shelter in Calgary prior to moving here. It was an easy place to, and a comfortable place to move into. The Women's Association, I'm sure prior to 1986, or I'm sure in 85, and Sally probably knows better than I, started working on grants with Marcia and I wondered this morning, was it what we call now Services Canada or HRBC, or, but now
Employment and Immigration Canada, I think.
but I think Secretary of State Women's Programs was also part of the funding of WomenWorks. So the collective at the time put together the grant proposal, and we got the funding, and so there's more of a focus on employment. And the terminology of the day for the program, the intent was for it to be for disadvantaged women. And we would have great discussion what did disadvantaged, I mean, it wasn't too much of a stretch to figure out what disadvantaged was. It was, the intent was for women who'd been out of the workforce for whatever reason, for raising children, for just lack of training, education, skills. The program was a 16-week-long program, and women would spend that long a time in a classroom. There were three of us working for WomenWorks, Joan Sylvie, Heather Gibson, before her, Ann McMillan, Heather Gibson, and myself. Joan Sylvie and I spent a summer developing the content or material that we were going to deliver or speak with the women about, and we were directed to infuse a feminist content, which was probably one of the more unique parts of a women's employment program. So the women would spend, and we moved into the medical arts building. We had which is a beautiful building, great view for parades on Baker and Ward. And the women would spend 16 weeks with us in the classroom, and then 16 weeks we would find, and they would find and name choices of places they want to work in the community, whether it was businesses, nonprofits. And there was a big emphasis on what we call then non-traditional trades and work. And we'd have women from the community, and I see a number of them in this audience, that would come in who were journeyman carpenters, Marcia being one of them, and other women ambulance, first responders, that just a whole myriad of trades, reporters, writers, that kind of thing, come in and talk with the women. The women came from all walks of life, and so for 16 weeks we would support them out in workplaces, and I think over the course of, it ran from 1986 to 1989, there were over about 110 women who went through the program. I've seen many of them over the years in the community, and we forged very close connections. They forged close connections with one another, which of course is a great part of doing that kind of program in a group. The issues were very similar, I'm sure, that from the past then that they are even right now, and of course poverty was a huge issue for women. Relational issues, emotional, mental distress issues, health issues, absolutely. But employment was a big one, and women still living in substandard housing, not being able to afford a decent standard of quality of life. And that was the whole intent of the program, was to support women to improve that for themselves. The strength of the program, one of the unique things was that any employment programs up to that point had been either women were on assistance or were paid a stipend. We insisted that women were paid a wage, and it was a wage higher than minimum wage at that time. The length of the program really helped women because they felt really supported over the long term. And of course, having the support of the collective was amazing for women. And we introduced women to a lot of concepts and ideas that they hadn't had given a lot of thought to, hadn't been exposed to, might have rejected outright in the past, and some women warmed to that, and we learned a lot from them. It truly was an amazing program. We had an external audit or review in 1989, and it came out with a very positive outcome. However, government being what it is, it ended in 1989. But I think the success carries on, and the women who had that experience. It was certainly a success and quite an experience for us who worked in it, just in terms of, and some people have mentioned around grant writing. Every year we would have to reapply for funding, of course. And we were early pioneers in computers. One of our group rooms, we had computers and introduced all the women in the program with the old DOS systems, and they were quite archaic at the time. But that was also quite an exciting feature of the program. I don't know, there's so many things to say about WomenWorks, and I just feel really grateful I was part of it. And my daughter here, who is now 20, was part of it because she was in gestation and working with women. It was wonderful to be able to have babies and breastfeed while we worked.